Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been a real estate photographer for over 15 years, and my job requires me to be on call pretty much all the time. That's why I chose to buy a house in a quiet neighborhood next to a condo complex. The location was perfect, close to downtown but still peaceful enough to work from home when needed. The condo complex next door has always been a source of mild entertainment, mainly because of their homeowners association board members who seem to think they're running a small country rather than a residential community. There's only one way in and out of the complex now. They had a back entrance years ago, but the homeowners association didn't want to maintain the road, so they blocked it off with cement barriers about 2 decades ago. Everything was relatively normal until the summer of 2020. That's when things got interesting, and not in a good way. One morning I was heading out for a photo shoot when I saw construction workers installing a gate at the complex entrance. They had put it across one lane and blocked the other lane with these massive steel pipes filled with concrete cemented right into the ground. No warning, no signs, nothing. My neighbor from the complex was outside looking as confused as I was. When I asked about the gate, they explained that they had just found out about it themselves and mentioned getting hit with a special assessment fee to pay for it. When I questioned whether they had gotten city approval, my neighbor said the board president had simply claimed it was necessary because people were using their dumpsters. The gate wasn't even operational yet, but it was already causing problems. The entrance had effectively become a single lane, and people had to do this awkward dance whenever cars needed to go in opposite directions. Then came the incident that really kicked things off. I was working from home when I heard sirens. An ambulance was trying to reach someone in the complex, but there was already a line of cars trying to get out. It was chaos. When I spoke to one of the paramedics, who was visibly frustrated, they told me they'd never had issues accessing this complex before. I started documenting everything: the traffic backups, the near accidents, the frustrated delivery drivers. I sent everything to the city council. Other neighbors did the same. When local authorities questioned the homeowners association, their property manager was incredibly dismissive. They insisted it was private property and they could do whatever they wanted. The board president tried to defend their actions by claiming they were protecting their community from people dumping trash in their dumpsters. But they were wrong. You can't just obstruct traffic flow on a road that connects to public streets. It's a safety hazard and against building codes. For 2 years, we watched the chaos unfold. Emergency vehicles struggling to get through, delivery trucks backing up traffic, residents arguing about who should back up to let others pass. The homeowners association kept defending their decision even as complaints piled up. Then last week, something beautiful happened. I woke up and the gate was gone. Not just the gate, the concrete-filled pipes too. Everything had been professionally removed overnight. Later that day, I ran into my neighbor again. They shared the incredible news. The board president and property manager had never gotten proper permits and had ignored multiple warnings from the city. Now they were personally liable for the removal costs and had to refund everyone's special assessment fees. When I asked about the dumpster issue they were so worried about, my neighbor laughed and revealed that they could have just put locks on the dumpsters for a fraction of the cost. The whole gate project had cost over $200,000. The board president and property manager are both being sued by the homeowners association for breach of fiduciary duty. Apparently, they had family members involved in the construction company that installed the gate. Talk about karma. The residents are now organizing a special meeting to elect a new board. I've got some great before and after photos of the whole debacle. Let me tell you how I managed to dethrone a tyrant who had been making our lives miserable for years. My wife and I bought our dream home 15 years ago in a beautiful neighborhood in Texas. The houses were newer, well-maintained, and the area was highly desirable. Everything was peaceful for the first decade or so. Sure, we had a homeowners association, but they were reasonable and mainly focused on maintaining property values. That all changed when a new property management company took over. They brought with them a stack of new rules and regulations, but that wasn't the real problem. The real issue was Karen, a board member who had practically appointed herself as a neighborhood dictator for the past decade. I still remember the first time I crossed paths with her, about a week after moving in. I was unloading some boxes from my truck when she approached me. She immediately started lecturing me about how overnight parking of trucks wasn't allowed in driveways. When I explained I was just unloading boxes and would be done in an hour, she curtly told me to make sure it was gone by sunset, adding that they had standards to maintain here. From that moment on, I was on her blacklist, along with several other families who didn't bow to her every whim. But we managed to coexist mostly by avoiding her. That is, until the new management company arrived. One day, I received an email about a package that had been left on my porch for more than 24 hours. Then another about a bag of mulch visible from the street. These were just warnings, but I knew what was coming. The real drama started when my wife and I decided to repaint our house. According to the rules, we had to paint a 3-foot square on the front of our house for approval. We did exactly that. A week later, I got an email from the property manager informing me that the Architectural Review Committee had rejected our color choice. Fine. We chose another color and painted another square. We waited and waited. 30 days passed with no response, which according to the rules meant automatic approval. That's when things got interesting. The property manager sent another email, this time notifying us of a fine for mismatched paint on our home's exterior. They were actually fining us for the test squares they required us to paint. But it didn't stop there. They also fined us for having Christmas lights up in summer, lights that didn't even exist. I tried posting about this on the neighborhood's website, but they immediately banned me. That's when I decided enough was enough. My wife and I hired a lawyer who specialized in homeowners association law. He reviewed all our documents and found something interesting. Our association didn't even have the legal authority to issue fines. In Texas, this power must be specifically granted in the founding documents, and ours didn't have it. But it got better. The board was required by law to hold open meetings and send certified letters before issuing fines. They'd done neither. They were breaking multiple state laws, and we had proof. Our lawyer drafted a complaint that was absolutely beautiful. When Karen and the board received it, all hell broke loose. Suddenly, Karen had to step down due to personal commitments. But we weren't done. In the settlement, we demanded that all fines ever issued be refunded with interest, the property management company be stripped of their enforcement powers, and all actions taken by the board in the last 4 years be revoked. We even added a special term limit that prevented Karen from running for the board again for 10 years. A week after the settlement, I saw Karen moving boxes into her car. One of my neighbors stopped by and asked what was happening with Karen. She responded by yelling from her driveway that the neighborhood had gone to the dogs, and she was selling her house to move somewhere with proper standards. I couldn't resist and offered to help her with the boxes, mentioning I had a truck I could park in the driveway. She slammed her car door so hard I thought the window would break. She moved to a neighborhood without a homeowners association. Ironic, considering how much she loved enforcing their rules. The new board is much more reasonable now. They focus on actual issues instead of harassing residents about packages on porches or imaginary Christmas lights. Property values are still rising, and the neighborhood looks better than ever. Just last week, I painted my house the color we originally wanted. No test squares needed this time. The new board approved it right away. And you know what? Even Karen's old supporters have admitted it looks great. I've been running this repair shop for about 5 years now. After spending 15 years fixing electronics in the corporate world, I decided I wanted to do something more meaningful with my skills. That's when I came up with the idea of opening a repair shop where I could teach local teenagers the trade while giving them a decent paying job. Most of our customers are amazing people who appreciate what we do, but every now and then we get someone who makes me question my faith in humanity. This is one of those stories. Last week, a woman came in with a broken electronic device. One of my best young apprentices handled the repair while I supervised. The work took about 4 hours, and we even gave her a generous discount, bringing the bill down from $220 to just $100. That's when things went south. She started yelling about how we were trying to rip her off. When I explained that we'd actually given her a significant discount from the original price of $220, she accused my young employee of breaking something else while fixing it. She even complained about our front desk staff being rude, which wasn't true at all. When I assured her that I had personally supervised the repair and everything was done correctly, she actually asked me if I knew who she was, as if that would change anything. She tried to pay with a credit card we don't accept, so I told her we'd take a personal check. She wrote one, and we thought that was the end of it. Nope. The check bounced. I called her the next day to inform her about the returned check and the additional fee, all of which was clearly outlined in the service agreement she'd signed. She showed up at our shop carrying a bag of pennies. I knew exactly where this was going. She dropped the first bag on our front desk, making my young employee nearly jump out of his skin. She announced triumphantly that she was here to pay her bill and had plenty more pennies to bring up. She was already out of breath from climbing the stairs, ignoring the elevator, and I could tell she hadn't thought this through. I took over from my shaken employee. When I asked how many more bags she had, she smugly told me the bank had helped her load them all in her car, and she hadn't counted them. I replied that we'd wait for her to bring them all up and then we'd count them together. One of my kids offered to help her carry the bags, but she refused. It took her 6 trips up the stairs to bring all the bags. By the end, she was drenched in sweat and shaking. The pennies were all loose. She'd actually dumped them out of their rolls to make a point. When I told her that we'd need to count every penny to ensure the correct amount was there, she looked shocked. She tried to protest, but I explained that since she'd already passed a bad check, we needed to verify the payment. My front desk employee and I started counting while our other workers handled the regular customers. Karen paced around, sat down, stood up, and generally looked more uncomfortable by the minute. Finally, she gave up and told us to forget it, pulling out $125 in cash and looking defeated. When she turned to leave, one of my youngest employees innocently asked if she'd like help carrying the pennies back to her car. She quietly mumbled something about us keeping the pennies and practically ran out the door. She'd posted on social media earlier about her brilliant plan to pay with pennies. When she later complained about how it went down, people just shared her original post and laughed at her backfired revenge attempt. We took all those pennies to the bank's coin machine and donated the amount to our local shelter. I guess some good came out of her pettiness after all. Now whenever we have a difficult customer, we just look at each other and ask if they'd like to pay in pennies. Works like a charm to break the tension. I've always struggled with severe anxiety, especially in crowded places. It started when I was in high school, after a particularly traumatic incident where I got trapped in a packed elevator for hours. Since then, crowded spaces, particularly ones that are hot and loud, tend to trigger intense anxiety attacks. When these attacks hit, I completely shut down. I can't move, speak, or respond in any way. I just sit there, staring into space while crying and shaking. Traditional therapy helped somewhat, but the real breakthrough came when my therapist suggested getting an emotional support animal. That's how Alice came into my life, the sweetest, fluffiest senior cat you could imagine. She has this incredibly soft meow that you can barely hear unless she really needs your attention. What's amazing about her is how she can sense when I'm about to have an anxiety attack. She'll gently rub against my hand or face to distract me before things get too bad. I was planning a trip to Florida to visit my dad's new place, and while I was nervous about flying, I knew I'd be okay with Alice by my side. The morning of the flight was particularly rough. My car broke down on the way to the airport. We almost missed check-in, and the whole rush left me feeling extremely on edge. Unfortunately, the airline couldn't seat my dad and me together, so I ended up next to this middle-aged woman who would turn out to be the most entitled person I've ever met. The trouble started as soon as I sat down with Alice in my lap, wearing her emotional support animal vest. The woman kept staring at us and then began questioning me about why I had a cat with me. When I explained that Alice was my emotional support animal, she immediately accused me of faking it, saying I didn't look like someone who needed one. She suggested I was just trying to bring my pet on the flight. I tried explaining about my anxiety, but she wouldn't listen. Looking at my piercings and dyed hair, she started making assumptions about my character, calling me a delinquent and accusing me of being someone who regularly broke rules. I attempted to explain that the airline actually allowed pets in carriers anyway, but that Alice needed to be out to help me stay calm. Instead of understanding, she threatened to take Alice away from me. My anxiety started spiking at this threat, and I held Alice closer. She must have sensed my distress because she let out one of her tiny meows, not even directed at the woman. The woman immediately started screaming, falsely claiming that Alice had hissed at her and tried to attack her. She even went as far as to claim that Alice had bitten her. When a flight attendant came to check on the situation, the woman demanded that Alice be put down, claiming she was a dangerous animal. The flight attendant pointed out that they'd been watching and hadn't seen any aggressive behavior, reminding her that Alice was a documented emotional support animal and that they'd already confirmed no nearby passengers had allergies. They offered to move her to a different seat if she was uncomfortable, but she refused, insisting that we should be the ones to move and accusing me of faking my need for an emotional support animal. She then started putting on a show of fake sneezing and coughing, trying to convince the flight attendants to make me put Alice away. A passenger from across the aisle came to my defense, confirming that they'd been watching too and that Alice hadn't done anything wrong. The woman was the one causing problems. After about 45 minutes of constant harassment, the head flight attendant stepped in. They told the woman that they'd received multiple complaints about her behavior and that she would need to move to a different seat. When she protested and threatened to sue for discrimination, they gave her a choice: either move seats or be met by security when we landed. She finally moved, though she continued muttering angrily as she went to her new seat. The flight attendants were incredibly kind afterward, giving Alice some treats and even leaving the middle seat empty so she could have her own space. After we landed, several passengers came by to tell me how well-behaved Alice was, sharing pictures of their own cats. The airline actually ended up banning that woman from future flights after multiple passengers filed complaints about her behavior. My dad later told me he overheard her at baggage claim, still complaining about me to anyone who would listen, until another passenger finally told her to stop. That was 2 years ago, and while I haven't flown since then, I've found other ways to travel. Last year, my friends and I drove from Minnesota to Seattle. Alice loved the road trip. She's actually a great car traveler. But I still think about that woman sometimes and wonder what made her so bitter that she'd try to separate someone from their support animal. Maybe she's just a dog person, or maybe she's just someone who can't stand seeing others get accommodations she doesn't think they deserve. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.